We're here in Palatine, Illinois, just outside Chicago. And the next time that you're passing near Chicago, do we ever have the funeral home for you?
Something really exciting happened on our drive to Chicago.
Yay!
We hit 100,000 miles traveled in my car. I got this back in 2011. It's a 2012 Chevy Cruze, and it's the only car I've ever owned. Because quite frankly, it's a great car, and I'm gonna run it into the ground before ever replacing it. But hitting that milestone got me thinking. In the grand scheme of things in life, have I put those 100,000 miles to good use? Have I lived my best life in all the journeys these miles have carried me on? After all, now I'm 100,000 miles closer to death. And so that got me thinking about death and where I might want to have my funeral, because Cassie and I love weird and quirky stuff, and the sad reality is most funeral homes are pretty boring. Or so I thought.
This is Arthur Ahlgrim with his wife Alma. And here's Arthur driving his first horse-drawn hearse into Forest Park, Illinois in 1893. The nets draped over the horses indicate that this was someone important. Arthur was the founder of Ahlgrim Family Funeral Services. In 1905, as the business grew, he moved the business to West 21st Street. Here's his son, Walter, posing in a carriage out front. Decades went by. Here's Arthur outside of the funeral home he opened on West Division Street in Chicago in '28. And then in 1944, Arthur left the business to Walter. Here's his son, Roger, standing outside of the new Palatine, Illinois funeral home, which he opened with his brothers, Arthur and Robert, in 1964. And here is the Palatine Funeral Home today. Palatine is a quiet town that's just a quick hour detour from downtown Chicago up to the northwest. If you're coming from the Loop, just hop on the Blue Line to catch the Northwest Metro and take that all the way to the Palatine station here. Anywho, as we've reached 100,000 miles and Ryan contemplated death, it was a dark and stormy night as we arrived at the Ahlgrim funeral home. We'd heard rumors of something quite unusual in the basement that we just had to make the detour for. If you pass through a long corridor and then down some stairs in the back of the building and through one last door, you'll find... Oh, whoa! Oh my gosh! Mini golf! This is Ahlgrim Acres, a 9-hole mini golf course that's below the funeral home and 20 feet below street level. It's literally the last thing you'd ever expect to find beneath a funeral home, and that alone makes it worth a stop. It's possibly the most ambitious crossover of all time. And appropriately, it's been the subject of a lot of headlines over the years, which they've proudly hung on the wall. Ahlgrim's hidden secret, par for the corpse, bury a loved one, and then tee off. So, as you can imagine, we had a lot of questions. First and foremost, why?
Mr. Roger Ahlgrim, he would be the third generation of the business. He's the one who opened this building. And what he really enjoyed was miniature golf.
Here's Roger with his wife, Margaret. Remember, he was Arthur's grandson. And this is Jonathan Gwizdala. He's a 5th-generation family member and funeral director in Palatine. He met up with us to give us the scoop on this incredible attraction.
So he just started. He started building miniature golf holes. And then as you could tell by looking around, there's added fun. You know, why stop at the miniature golf? Get things from the community, games, and it's just kind of a living organism in its own. It's always changing.
Okay, just to be clear, upstairs, funeral home. Downstairs, mini golf. The entire course is handmade, and each hole offers its own unique challenge. And, if you haven't noticed, the golf course is haunted themed. There's skulls, coffins, monsters, and graveyards. Inside this haunted house is a boombox that plays tortured screams on loop. Why did you choose the theming down here? What made you
I don't
pick
think
that?
we chose it. I think it came with the territory, so to speak. You know, there are actual funeral memorabilia here. The first hole actually has Mr. Roger Ahlgrim's skull
No, not his real skull. They're not that grim. It's his old educational skull from when he was in mortuary school, though I think the blinking lights in the eyes were added later.
It's an actual piece of mortuary education that he's incorporated into the fun. So his miniature golf started with his life. And he thought, well, what can I do that's fun that I have? Well, we have a lot of funeral things, so.
So that's one level of the why. Roger Ahlgrim is a man with a great sense of humor who loves mini golf. But Ahlgrim Acres also has a much deeper meaning to the community and the families the funeral home serves.
I think it's just a fun way to get the community into the funeral home and see that, you know, it doesn't always have to be sadness. You're not, oh, we gotta go to the funeral home because something unfortunate happened. Just our little way of, hey, come have some fun with us. You know we do see you at times that aren't as happy, so come have some fun with us as well.
And when you think about it, beyond the surface silliness of a mini golf course, a funeral home finding a way to connect with the community is quite a remarkable thing. After all, when was the last time you hung out with your local funeral director? Just as a friend, you know? And the way Ahlgrim sort of blurs the barrier between the sadness of loss and wholesome levity really resonates with the community.
We call it our community room. It's just one way we like to give back to the community. The locals know about it. There's people who come for their birthdays regularly. There's the groups, you know, the local neighborhood kids. If it's a hot summer day and they can't go to the pool, hey, we come play in your community room. It's down here, it's nice and cool.
And by blurring that barrier, it makes coming to the funeral home easier for both children and adults when a sad passing in the family does occur. And in that sense, the whole thing is really extraordinary. And just as Ahlgrim offers up something that brings the community together, the community often comes together to add things to the mini golf course.
This was from a Cub Scout group that came and would play here around Halloween. This casket was actually built by the Lake Zurich Police Department. They actually used to do a haunted house, which was really cool. And they had put a bunch of stuff away and somebody was going through a storage unit and found it, and the same way called us up and they were like, hey, we got this casket. Do you guys want it for the basement?
This is Sandra Ahlgrim. She's married to Doug Ahlgrim, the oldest son of mini golf architect Roger Ahlgrim. She was doing some maintenance on the course when we made the detour and is an expert on all the various pieces that the community has donated over the years.
Mike's barbershop was in Palatine for many, many years, and Roger, the man who built the golf course, used to go there and get his hair cut. And when he retired, he called him and said, do you want my barber pole and my sign?
That is so cool.
Yeah.
And the course's most frightening decoration came from their friends at Cambridge Bank in Lake Zurich, Illinois. And get this, Sandra actually made him.
He's like a big wire structure. This is actually paint and wallpaper paste, and you dip burlap in it and just hang it.
So it's not just a mini golf course, and it's not just a funeral home, it's also a museum with artifacts and memories from all over Palatine and the surrounding communities. A living, ever-changing organism, as Jonathan put it. And that's something any small community would be lucky to have. A place where pieces of the town can be celebrated and remembered lovingly, just as the deceased are celebrated and remembered lovingly upstairs. And the more time we spent there, the less crazy the whole thing seemed. Quite to the contrary, Ahlgrim Acres seemed like the beating heart of a wonderfully unique little town.
What I love is when we get the phone calls of, is this real? Like, you're a funeral home, right? Yes, we're a funeral home. But you have like miniature golf in the basement? Yep, it's all true. It's real. Come take a look.
And so, come take a look with us.
This one's meaningful to me with Mr. Ahlgrim's mortuary skull here, just because it has the personal connection. You know, my grandfather, that's what he learned how to be a funeral director and embalmer on. Mr. Ahlgrim lives in Michigan now, up on Silver Lake, and that's our happy place. So that's actually sand from Michigan.
Oh, how cool.
And then the wood there is dune wood.
I never thought a skull in a sand trap would have such a nice story behind it.
It is, but there's a big piece on the left, so that's a lot harder to get by, so I always like to go on the right. Oh, right off the top of his head. That probably couldn't have done it again if I tried. Oh, that was good.
Oh, into the sand trap. And no pressure.
There we go.
We don't want to spoil the entire course because it's really something you have to come and experience for yourself. But Jonathan walked us through a few of his favorites.
Oh.
Next up was the haunted house. Innocent looking at a glance, but closer inspection reveals some sinister figures lurking in the windows.
I always just think, just like a real haunted house, just go fast, hit it, and hope you make it out the other side.
Ready? Ooh!
Hey, you did really well. You didn't let this.
Oh!
That was good.
And next to the haunted house is Jonathan's favorite hole, the mausoleum. It's intricately detailed, most notably in the graveyard, which is where your ball ends up if you don't make it all the way through the building. That's where you'll find some really cool miniature figures haunting the grounds and open graves that cost you a stroke if you're unlucky enough to roll into them. Wait, so what does it say on these gravestones over here?
So we have different names. So I have my grave marker with my year of death, and we'll see whoever made that if their, fortune telling is correct or not. 2050, I have a little bit of time still.
Yeah, you can start counting down. Woo, nice. Try to stay to the left.
All right.
Oh, nice.
Oh, even better. Yeah.
Woo! And finally, check out this amazing pinball machine inspired hole.
So it's like, the whole traditional pull the plunger and let it go.
Oh
Well, we're the plunger. The grave markers are angled to move your ball around.
Yeah.
And if you get it directly in the middle, you'll get yourself a hole in one.
Here we go. Pinball time.
That was
Ooh,
good.
ooh, ooh.
And there you are. All right.
Oh, that was close.
I've had more practice.
And while we're on the subject of pinball, as we were playing the course, we noticed some pinball machines back against the far wall. And not just any pinball machines, vintage ones. One was called Mystic. It was built by Bally Manufacturing right nearby in Chicago in 1980. And right around the corner was an even more intriguing one. This is Daffy Derby. It was built in 1954 by Williams Manufacturing, also in Chicago. At 67 years old, it's unique in that there's only one flipper, and in that hitting the bumpers on the table make the horses up top gallop and race along a track.
So when we find something old and unusual like Daffy Derby, obviously our curiosity starts running wild. So to learn more about Williams pinball tables from the 1950s, I knew just the guy to talk to, all the way back 500 miles to the east, here in Westview, Pennsylvania. This is Pinball Perfection, a pinball museum just outside of Pittsburgh. And this is Dan Hosick, aka Pin Dan. He's the curator here, and he has a lot of old Williams wood rail tables. We even found this one called Jalopy, which has a racing mechanic like Daffy Derby, just with cars instead of horses. And it has 2 flippers.
So, what can you tell me about Daffy Derby?
Daffy Derby is one of the odd Harry Williams games. That one has back box animation and a 1 flipper. It's another odd, wood rail of the Williams, which I love those type of games.
Wood rail games are pre-1960 tables that have wooden siding, doors, and legs. You can always tell an original Williams table by its signature red legs. In the 1960s, manufacturers moved away from wood because...
Easy to break into and cheat, so something had to happen.
Which was a big deal back then. The reason being...
The early ones had a little gambling aspect mixed in, a card or holes with flippers, so it looked like a pinball, but it paid.
So the newer tables were fortified with metal to stop devious players from literally drilling into them.
They had to put metal bottoms in them because they'd just break the bottoms out.
However, Daffy Derby was not a gambling table, though that doesn't mean people in the 50s didn't gamble with it anyway.
That one's more of an amusement machine just because of the back box animation. Sure, you could pick your horse and bet for smokes or beers or whatever.
And so the wood rail tables faded out as newer, more secure models took over. So now it's very rare to find one out in the wild. He showed us 2 Williams tables that are spiritual cousins to Daffy Derby. This one from 1953 called 9 Sisters.
It incorporates a single flipper, like the Daffy Derby. It's the first machine with score reels. So this has got a historical aspect. If you'd light up a certain amount of girls, you might get a pack of smokes or something.
And this one from 1952 called Skyway.
Single flipper, has the catch down the side, has a ramp, an actual, ramp. They had, it took all the way really into the 80s to where ramps took over. Harry Williams was ahead of his time.
Take it from us. If you ever find yourself at Pinball Perfection or Ahlgrim Acres or anywhere with a vintage wood rail, play a few balls and feel the history at your fingertips.
There's nobody beating the door down to play wood rails. That's just the sad thing.
I think they're fascinating.
They're beautiful.
So you get the idea. Whether it's gleefully macabre mini golf, tributes to the community, community, or even rare old pinball tables. There's quite a lot to take in down below this deceptively normal-looking funeral home in Illinois. And with that in mind, if you would like to swing by and hit the haunted links, just call ahead of time to schedule a visit. The visits, though, are completely free.
So on the final hole, the goal would be to make it up. It's quite a bit of a big ramp. You're trying to get it behind the waterfall. There you go.
Oh! It's fun to think about what Arthur would have thought about all this way back in 1892 when he started the business. Back then, there were no funeral homes. Arthur Ahlgrim would come to your home in his carriage to hold the service there. So a funeral business establishing such a strong personal connection with the people they serve has historical precedence. But I think it's safe to say that no one has ever done it quite as creatively as Ahlgrim has. As we headed off onto our next adventure, we kicked off our next 100,000 miles with a stop at the Leaning Tower of Niles and one of our favorite breweries, Three Floyds. And we found ourselves appreciating these quick detours even more, the way a visit to a funeral home always tends to give you a fresh appreciation of the little things in life. And with that, here's to the next 100,000 miles and all the quick detours we'll take on the way. Happy road tripping, everyone!